and what's really going on is just such an interesting, and I think such an important thing for us, especially going into this next month. So thanks for having me. Thanks for taking time over your lunch break to come and hear us out. So let's see. Let me see if I can get to the next slide. There we go. Um, so this is what I'm hoping to talk about today, and see where the conversation goes. I want to try and leave a fair amount of time towards the end to just have a discussion, whether that's Q&A or general discussion about election integrity and security. Kind of see where that takes us, having lived through 2016 very much down in the trenches. So I was in DC for that election. I spent the month leading up to the 2016 election essentially flying around to different state election offices, kind of seeing what was going on, and working with different state offices, and now kind of get to watch it a little bit more removed. But have a few sort of upfront things that I want to talk about a little bit, kind of in the disclaimer realm, and then set the stage for election security and integrity in the United States. What that means, kind of the context that we think about these things, because it's such a vast topic, and I think it's very easy to get confused, or to kind of run together different areas and different threats as we look at them. Talking a little bit about voting in 2020, what that process looks like, some of the things that we're talking about these days and what we're hearing about, and then move into the discussion. So I don't have many slides. Unfortunately, the ones I do have are a little bit wordy. Sorry for that. I'm not going to read each of them line by line, I promise. But one thing I felt was really important to state up front is I suspect that some of what follows may come across as partisan, and potentially in both directions. And to the greatest extent possible, it isn't. And I think that there's no way around the fact that many of these things have an interpretation, that each of the parties have taken stances on them. But what's interesting as you look at these is, if you go back into prior elections, you would find that the roles have swapped as you go back through. And the reason for that is, in pretty much every election, the incumbent party is incentivized to maintain the status quo as relates to election law and process, and that got them elected last time. And the challenger party is generally incentivized to try and change things. That's not always the case, but that's typically what we see in almost every election, going back, I mean, as far as back as you want to go. And so, this round, generally speaking, the Republican Party holds the White House, they hold the Senate. And we see that generally speaking, across the country, the Republican Party would like to maintain the status quo. The Democratic Party would like to change a lot of things. If you go back to 2016, that situation was reversed, and I sat through a number of hearings and proposals to try and change things. And so, just wanted to put that out there, and give a little bit of context to some of the conversation that's happening now. So a lot of this material comes from the National Association of State Election Directors in terms of how we look at election threats, and sort of the current level of threats out there, as well as the Department of Homeland Security, which only got involved in election security after the 2016 election. It's a little bit interesting. So some things about the election system in the United States: it's highly decentralized. It's one of the most decentralized electoral systems in the world. Most folks think about the U.S. election, and they think about this as a federal process. It's absolutely not a federal process. It's laid out in the Constitution, generally speaking, that we're going to hold an election, every 4 years in November, but the election is actually 50 separate elections. So every state, we talk about the presidential election, every state is individually electing its congressmen and women, its senators, and its electors for president. Every state, other than the Constitution and the federal government saying, thou shalt put forward, the appropriate number of your congressional delegation and your electors for president, it says nothing about how every state will do it. Whether a state supports mail-in or not, whether they require in person, and everything about it, down to how they count the ballots, whether they do first past the post or ranked choice ballot, all of that is absolutely up to the states. And in fact, a lot of that is up to the counties, it's up to the cities. And so it's really a patchwork of laws and regulations going across the country, that is in some ways our greatest strength, and also our greatest weakness when it comes to securing the integrity of our elections. It's also a lot more complicated, and with that, a lot more secure than most people realize. So I think a lot of folks, certainly myself, getting into the industry back in 2015, kind of assumed that I either show up at a polling place, I fill out my ballot, I drop it off, I'm done, and somebody or a machine counts that ballot, totals it all up. I've been a software guy my whole career. I kind of mentally think through, well, it's not that hard. It's a Scantron or it's a computer. You count it up, you total up the results, and you're done. Or if you mail it in, same thing. I drop it in the mail and we're done. The complexity that's going into this is actually pretty staggering. Every ballot is accounted for. Every ballot that gets mailed out or that gets sent out, either it gets sent out to a polling place or mailed out, every sheet of paper is counted for. Everything that comes back is accounted for. Every ballot that didn't come back is accounted for. Every ballot that's opened is, the signature that goes on that is actually matched to the signature on file. And if those signatures don't match, you're going to get a note in the mail that says you have until 2 days before the end of the canvassing period to get in touch with us because your signature didn't match, or the address didn't match, or your phone number didn't match. The complexity of going out to a polling place and figuring out that, I think in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles ballots, there are over 3,000 ballot formats to service the county of Los Angeles. When you talk about every different precinct, every language they have to support, and all those sorts of things. And so the complexity that goes into that, the auditing that goes in behind that, is vastly more complicated, I think, than most people realize coming into that. And I to me, at least, there's a level of confidence that comes out of that when push comes to shove, when it actually comes to what you mark on a sheet of paper being properly counted by somebody at the end, there's a vast network of people and technology that's going into making that happen correctly. At the same time, it's a pretty antiquated and underfunded system. So I was in this space. I was out there both trying to raise funds from investors. I was trying to make money in it, and one of the things. So we had to go through and do this analysis, and for election system technology. So all the tools and technology that go into this space in the United States, we estimated the market to be about $350 million a year. And so if you think about that, that basically works out to just a little over $1 per person per year going into this industry. And so while there is a lot that goes into it, while there is a lot of people, there's a lot of process. When you compare it against the tools and technology that's going into things like online banking, fraud detection in that space, credit reporting, and the types of algorithms and tools that we're putting towards that, this is a drop in the bucket. I mean, there are probably companies out there, the Visa processing network probably is probably spending more in their fraud detection than our voting system is able to spend in ours. And that's sort of where this greatest strength, greatest weakness of such a decentralized system comes into play. The other piece that's fascinating is that there's a huge amount of ambiguity at the fringes of elections. We think about it as this is so simple. I mean, I one person, one vote. How hard can it be? And when you roll it all up to we're voting for president of the United States, it generally is simple for 90 some odd % of us. For 1 to 2%, it gets very difficult. And what we often find is elections get decided by 1 to 2%. So we can all look and see. I mean, we can read the news articles that talk about kind of common cases. I got to see a couple of them in person. Some things that I saw in the field were as simple as figuring out which precinct, which area a person actually lives in. So in the state of New Jersey, as an example, there's lines drawn that say you either live in this district or you live in this other district. And sometimes those lines bisect an apartment complex. And it turns out that the actual rule is if the line bisects your home, then the precinct you live in is based on where your head lies when you're sleeping at night. And so if you want to vote in the other district, then move your bed. And if there are more Republicans than Democrats in the other district, and the Republican Party, for example, or the Democratic Party would like to swing the district in another way, they can knock on your door and say, well, for this month, when you register, could you just move your bed to the other side of the house and let's move things along? Or they could come in and say, well, actually, this person, and this actually happened. We saw this happen, and our client, went through a court case over it. This person who was elected as a councilman in this district wasn't actually eligible, and they've held that role for the last 13 years. And so you see these little things that happen all the time, and I think that's where election integrity starts breaking down for us. It's not at the massive level. It's not at the millions of votes. It's, in my mind, it's not at massive fraud. It's down at the fringes. It's down at individual people, and yet we find that a lot of times the election can hinge on individual people. I mean, we all, well, not all of us, but many of us lived through the 2020 or the 2000 vote, where the election hinged on, I think it came down to just, it was less than 10,000, and really it came down to less than 1,000 votes in one precinct in Florida when all was said and done. So as we look at threats to election integrity, the Department of Homeland Security attempted to come up with a framework a few years ago. And again, I mentioned at the beginning, the federal government didn't actually have an office that formally looked at election integrity and security until after 2016. So after the 2016 election, in its outgoing months, the Obama administration formally declared elections to be critical infrastructure of the United States. And that was the first thing which gave the federal government any sort of regulatory, I guess that's a little bit too strong, but any sort of oversight capability over the elections process. And essentially, it was a recognition that no individual state had the resources to individually to combat any kind of state level action around election interference. And so by declaring it critical infrastructure, there's 17 critical infrastructures in the United States, nuclear power, the financial sector, medical sectors. By declaring election infrastructure to be a critical infrastructure sector, DHS was able to come in and start providing capabilities and resources and free penetration testing. And those of us that were in the industry could go get security clearances and all those things. And DHS attempted to come up with a framework to look at election interference and threats to election integrity, and came up with these 8 areas. So there's influence and misinformation. And I'm not going to go through read all these, but you all, I think, hopefully can see on the screen where those are, and maintains a stoplight chart of where do we have risk and where do we not. And what we see kind of across the board is we have a high degree of risk in influence and misinformation campaigns. And this is really exacerbated by social media, I'm suddenly blanking on the term I want to use around social media, but the echo chambers that a lot of us are living in right now, where it is relatively easy if you have resources, and this can be a nation state, this can be a domestic, you know, activist group. It can be a well-resourced individual that just wants to sway opinion and run ads. But the threat of misinformation driving people towards a particular action is incredibly high. As is the threat of suppression. And you know, suppression is defined formally not as doing anything necessarily illegal, but just any kind of active discouragement of someone who has the right to vote from exercising that right. So very different from disenfranchisement, which is somehow trying to take away their right to vote, but just anything you can do to convince someone who otherwise has every right to vote and would vote to not vote. So those are the areas considered high threat. The areas that are of moderate threat are disenfranchisement and vote buying or coercion. You know, and vote buying or coercion is an interesting one. So this is the area that is probably most susceptible to additional risk with mail voting versus in-person voting. You know, the ability. So this is any effort to buy a vote or threaten someone to vote in a certain way. And with in-person voting, this is incredibly difficult, right? It's incredibly hard to pay someone to vote or to threaten someone to vote a certain way if they're voting in person, because if I'm going into a polling station and I go behind the curtain and I key in my vote, I walk out and there is absolutely no way to prove that I voted in a particular way. I can come out and tell somebody, "Yep, you gave me $1,000 and I voted for Biden," and there is absolutely no way for that person ever. I can't prove that. The person could never prove it. The election officials could never prove, you know, what I dropped in the ballot box. There's absolutely no way to know whether that's true or not. Whereas voting by mail, that's not necessarily the case, because someone could actually stand over my shoulder and see, yep, you marked Biden or you marked Trump, and I saw you mark that and fold it and put it in the envelope and sign your name and drop it in the mailbox, and now you've voted. So that is truly the one area that most everyone will say is more susceptible to risk over mail, you know, in mail-in voting versus in-person voting. Everything else is generally considered somewhere between low to non-existent in the United States. True voter fraud, and again, there is always risk, but the underlying systems, they're very manual, they're very labor intensive, but the systems that go into identifying that a ballot is actually tied to a person who has the right to vote are vastly complicated and yet pretty secure. The ability to truly manipulate a vote on a global scale, notwithstanding an individual mail carrier, you know, committing criminal acts, or a poll volunteer, you know, trying to do something, and you'll always get individuals who are criminals. But outside of that, you know, ballot manipulation, I think that there was a report several years ago that there have been less than 200 criminal charges for ballot manipulation or voter fraud in the history of the United States. Tabulation manipulation, which is actually trying to change the count, again, almost non-existent, and results manipulation. There have never been any cases there've never been charges of trying to manipulate the results in this country. The closest I've ever seen was in and it wasn't intentional, and I was involved in it, was when we misannounced the winners of the Best Picture at the Oscars a couple years ago, and all the chaos that came out of that, envelope gate. And so, you know, coming into this year, the major decision in front of most of America is whether to vote in person or vote by mail. And that's a choice that, especially in California, we've always had. This year, it's a little bit more of a stark decision, and it's been kind of put in the line, in the spotlight a bit more than ever before. But the choice is really stark this year, and it's stark in part because of the pandemic, but also in California because of all the technology changes that have come about in 2020. So California is in many respects leading the nation, especially Los Angeles County. Los Angeles County has invested a massive amount, relatively speaking, in new voting technology. So they've done a phenomenal job in bringing in new voting machines, in bringing in new electronic poll books. And so, for all of us in the next month, there's this decision of do we go to the polling place because of all the logistics involved this year in particular? Do we go to the polling place? Do we face potentially long lines because no one knows how many people are going to show up? So staffing polling places is always a challenge, and this year the intent is generally to have less polling places than we've had before, on an assumption that less people are going to vote in person. But no one ever, all the models, all the analytics are broken this year, and this isn't just voting. This is everywhere. All of our traffic models, everything is broken. So we don't know how many people are going to show up. We don't know what the lines are going to look like. We've got new technology in place, and so folks will be voting on new voting machines, which generally I think is fantastic. As a guy who used to be in election tech, I think it's fantastic that they're doing that. But we're voting on new machines and new technology in a place where election security experts will say that the most secure option out there is vote on paper. You can't hack paper is kind of, I hated that term, but it's true. And so that's sort of the option on one end. The option on the other end is we're expecting more mail-in votes than we've ever seen. We've got a postal service that's more overloaded than it's ever been, and the process has been under scrutiny. And the reality is there will be mistakes, there will be bad ballots, there will be ballots thrown away. I had a pitch and I wish I'd thrown it in here. But I sat there watching mail-in ballots be processed, and there's a simple reality that when you're processing through 10 million, 20 million, 30 million mailed ballots in the state of California, there will be ballots that someone spills cups of coffee on. There will be ballots that go through the machine and get ripped up, and you can't figure out what they were supposed. All of these things are going to happen, and every one of them is a potential lost or missed vote, and B, a potential lawsuit. And so, I think it's important for all of us to understand our options as we go into this year and educate ourselves. And it's a risk management decision. It's understanding which risks we want to take. I think it's critically important that everyone exercise the right to vote this year. I think that's critically important every year, but this year in particular. And so, kind of the last things I'd want to run through before I hope we can open it up to a conversation is today's world, nothing we can do can stop these influence campaigns. They're here to stay. There is absolutely no realistic action that can change them. I do feel our greatest strength comes from our decentralized, state-managed elections, state and local managed election system. It's also our greatest weakness is that state and county election systems are generally underfunded and are a patchwork. We don't have the resources to combat malicious actors, especially at the nation state level. And this election cycle in particular is going to be a load that's likely to strain those resources. They just, resources have not been funneled there to handle what's probably coming in the next month. But the greatest risk is misinformation, not manipulation. Some actions everyone can take. It is shocking and heartbreaking every year to see how many folks don't register to vote. It's perfectly fine. Everyone has the right to not register and not vote. It's heartbreaking to see folks who just don't realize they didn't register to vote, and come election day just end up never voting, or I never got a ballot. What do you mean I can't vote? California is better than many states in that regard, in that you can register to vote up to election day. But nonetheless, it takes 30 seconds online. If you're on Instagram these days, Instagram will push you to register to vote, or check your registration right on the homepage. As will this year a shocking number of services. I mean, a lot of SaaS companies. There's a pretty big initiative that a lot of SaaS services just on their login page will have little reminders: click here to register to vote, or check your registration. California also offers an online service called Ballot Tracks, where you can sign up to basically get tracking for your ballot. And so it's called Ballot Tracks. It's through the California Secretary of State's website. But you enter your name, date of birth, and address, and it'll look up your ballot registration on the fly. And assuming that it finds your registration, allows you to get either email or text notifications every step of the way that your ballot is processed. So essentially, as soon as your ballot leaves the county office to you, it lets you know, hey, your ballot's in the mail, your ballot's been delivered. As soon as you mail it back, hey, we picked up your ballot's been received at the county office, your ballot's been opened, all of those things. And so essentially, it's FedEx style tracking of your ballot through the whole process. So you can sign up for that. Educating yourself, and I know that this is part of that process. And I saw that some of the other sessions are very much about that, and understanding, understand the issues you care about, understand the candidates and the ballot measures you're voting on. Remembering that blank votes are okay. If you don't understand it, it's perfectly okay to leave that one blank. And fact checking the most outrageous things you hear, especially if you heard it on social media. And last, but certainly not least, is understanding the process. Especially this year, because for everyone, the process has changed in some way or another this year. If you're voting in person, chances are pretty good your polling place has changed. So if it's been the same place for the last, 3 election cycles, there's a very good chance it's changed this year. So if you are planning to vote in person, don't just show up, double check. You can also dramatically cut down the work on your local election team by bringing your mail-in ballot. So everyone in California is getting a mail-in ballot this year. If you're in Orange County, they have been mailed out. They mailed out on October 5th. So you will dramatically reduce the work on the county election team by bringing in and surrendering your mail ballot if you're going to vote in person, because they have to account for that if it goes out. So if you vote in person, they cannot count. Basically, they have to go and track down and be on the lookout for your mail-in ballot coming back until they know for a fact that it was not sent. If you're voting by mail, follow all the instructions carefully. Obviously, postmark it by election day. Complete the envelope correctly. The vast majority of mail ballots that aren't counted are the ones that don't complete the ballot envelope the right way. Many people don't realize that if they don't complete the ballot envelope the right way, like they don't sign it or their signature looks wrong, they actually have almost a month after election day to fix it, as long as you've completed enough of it that they can tell who you are to get in touch with you to fix it. But a number of folks, I think it's the highest source of discarded ballots are people who send it back without even putting their name and address on it. And the county election team is sitting there with a ballot, a perfectly good ballot, but they have no idea who it came from. The other piece, which for anyone who does feel a security risk or a need to vote in person, because everyone is getting a mail ballot this year, you always have the option to take your mail ballot, fill it out, and drop it off in person. So it is, to some degree, the best of both worlds. So you have no need to wait in line. None of that. You still have all the benefits of having voted in person and seeing your ballot go into a ballot box, but you can fill it out at home, and you reduce a lot of the risk. Last piece, if you don't receive a ballot or you lose your mailed ballot, or if you have a disability that makes it difficult for you to receive a mailed ballot, you have the option this year in California to, you can fill out your ballot entirely online. So it's the California Remote Accessible Vote by Mail program. So you can go to their website, or if you happen to get a ballot in a language, you need your ballot in another language, you can go to the website, you can fill out your entire ballot online and print it and take that, either mail that in or take that to a polling place and drop it off. And that ballot has all sorts of special QR codes and other security features on it that allow it to be counted as a regular ballot as well. So there's a huge array of options. And I believe that was everything I had. So I hope that there's some discussion or questions or thoughts that folks have.
Thank you so much, James. That is just very interesting. Thank you. Everyone has the ability to unmute themselves for any questions. If you want to raise your hand, so that way as we get questions coming in, we can kind of keep a queue of them. But if anyone wants to jump in right now with the first question, please do so.
Or Bill, I saw your hand pop up there.
Thank you. This was very informative, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I did have a question, mostly on voter suppression, and it can take whatever side may or may not do it, but it can take a number of different ways. And one of them is if you send representatives to the registrar of voters and you challenge each ballot as they come through, that could really just take forever for the vote to count, and even push it back beyond the certification date as well. And the other thing, it reminded me of because you mentioned it, but the 2000 election, the Brooks Brothers riots, so to speak, that took place in Florida, where staffers went and literally started a mini riot in the registrar or wherever they were counting the ballots to disrupt that counting as well. Is that likely? Is that something that you think might take place?
I absolutely honestly expect that this cycle that'll happen somewhere. I think that poll watchers and challenges will become a pretty significant factor this year, and I expect I expect that in one or more jurisdictions the courts will end up stepping in to say what do we do if this pushes us past our canvassing deadline. And is it what'll be interesting to see, and a lot of it depends on the jurisdiction, is will the courts be willing to step out in front of it and make and take action before a deadline passes, or will they only come in and render a decision after the fact? Because my experience with election administrators is, they work to an assumption that we must have a certified result by this date. That the law says I have a certified result by this date, and consistently I've seen that they will get a board certified result by that date, and if that means that they need to start speeding up the challenge process, whatever, I think that's the stance that most of them I've worked with would take. And I think it'll be up to the courts to figure out how to handle that. Beiling, hi.
Hi. I was a poll worker in the 2016 election, and it was a really, it was a really interesting experience to see the process up close and how complex and not neat it can be. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit, you mentioned poll watchers, right? So how does one become actually a poll watcher, right? Like there's a process. You can't just wake up on November 3rd and be like, I feel like watching the polls, and then stroll over and plant yourself there, right? Like there's literally, and speaking as a poll worker, right? There's literally a process to be an official poll watcher. And if you haven't done that, you really, once you're done voting, have no business hanging out at the polling place, which right. I don't think people who may wish they could be poll watchers fully understand. So can you talk a little bit about that? If someone really wants to watch a poll, what is that process?
Yeah, so it's different in every jurisdiction. So again, with our little patchwork, every jurisdiction has their process. So generally every jurisdiction has a requirement that the voting process, that there is a poll watching process. The core requirement says that anyone who is a candidate has the right to appoint poll watchers to validate that the process is happening correctly. So, so the guaranteed path is that the political parties are able to appoint some number, and it's each jurisdiction has a certain number, but generally it's the political parties are each able to appoint. So if your political party appears on the ballot with any candidate or any number of candidates, the party is allowed to appoint some number of watchers to each. Again, usually it's to every polling location or to the precinct as a whole. So that's kind of the guaranteed path through. In most cases, the jurisdiction also has an application as an independent poll watcher, independent observer. Typically, they'll give that to a small number of nonprofits, international observers, those sorts of things. That's it. If you're anyone else, the press will get very, very limited access to poll places. Like they'll allow the press in for an hour to come in and do a little bit of shooting, as long as you don't speak to a voter. Anyone who's directly with the campaign or who wants to protest or anything like that has to stay. Again, it depends on the jurisdiction, but 50 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet away from the polling place at all times. So yeah, it's typically through the parties or through an application process that has to be done well in advance, and you need a special poll watcher badge and all those things.
Thank you so much. I believe Nicholas had a question, and then we also have Miss Joey Chen, having a question as well. Nicholas, you want to ask?
Awesome. Hello, James. My name is Nicholas, and I actually serve on Cal State Fullerton's Alumni Association Board of Directors. So thanks for being here and kind of sharing your thoughts on this.
Thanks for having me.
I just had a question. I wanted to get your thoughts on how we as a public educational institution can contribute to the security and integrity of voting. What exactly do you see the role, of higher ed in this process?
Well, I think what you all are doing now is part of that. I think that there's a lot of lack of understanding of how complicated this process really is. And I think that's how complicated it really is, both in its negatives and its positives. Because there are a lot of faults to the system, but there is also a lot of resiliency to the system. And I think that the more people are educated about that, so as I said, I could talk about its faults all day long. I still, on the whole, believe that when we're casting our ballots, that I still do believe that my ballot, if I cast it for a certain person, is going to be counted for that person. And so the more we can do to give people faith in that process, the better. Beyond that, where I think a lot of higher education institutions are starting to step up around the country, and this is just beginning, is in assisting in the ballot and election auditing process. So risk limiting audits are sort of the next big wave of how we ensure election integrity. Right now, there's only one state that does a 100% risk limiting audit on all elections, and that's Colorado. And they do it with extensive support from their university system, essentially because they need smart, objective people to come in and help them do that. And what they find is, generally speaking, if they're turning to their state educational system, this is someone that they can say, this is who we can trust as an outside entity to be objectively involved in, auditing our systems, counting, helping in the process.
Thank you. Ms. Chan, do you have a question?
Hi, yes.
Hey.
Well, it's my first event to join you guys, and I feel very honored and pleasure to hear everything from you. And I used to volunteer as a record clerk for election, and so I actually didn't really know too much how it works afterwards. I just collect all the mail-in ballots for the from the citizens. So I think it's great that I get to hear how integrity has completely applied it when they count the votes. Actually, I hope my question wouldn't be too sudden for you. I actually wanted to get some updates how the election process probably would change since it's COVID-19, you know. So what I have heard earlier time or just hear from the media, which I'm not sure if it is still current, they actually don't plan to have voters to go in to the station. They prefer to do mail-in. And I also hear some rumors or news that I wasn't really sure how accurate it is. They say that post office, since they have reduced hours, there are great possibility the mail-in ballot will get delayed to be counted toward this November election, which is a very big election. So There are also rumors that they would push back the date for the result announcement. Do you have any updates on that?
Yeah. So, you know, you still in California will have the option to vote in person. Governor Newsom issued an executive order saying that for this election cycle, every Californian who is registered to vote by a certain date, and I think that date has passed, but I think they're going to continue mailing them out. But every Californian who's registered to vote would be given a mail-in ballot. So generally in California, you have to request a mail-in ballot to vote by mail. For this election cycle, everyone is getting a mail-in ballot, whether you request one or not, as long as you're registered to vote. And you know, with that executive order, at the state executive level, so I need to make that distinction because there's certainly folks at the state legislative level who are not encouraging it, but at the state executive level, they're encouraging everyone to vote by mail. And sort of saying this is with COVID, with current social distancing requirements, this is the safest way. You will still have the opportunity to vote in person. If you feel comfortable voting in person or uncomfortable voting by mail, you'll still be able to vote in person this election cycle. You can vote early. So early voting is starting across the state now in many cases. And so that would be that's the next best recommendation is do early voting. And then vote on election day. The location will very likely change because there will be different or less polling places. So polling places for this year all have to meet, you know, all of the state's social distancing guidelines for whatever county you're in based on the county's current threat level or social distancing level. So you can vote in person, subject to all the social distancing. So 6 feet, wear a mask and all that. You will get a mail-in ballot. There is a good chance, or not a good chance, there's a possibility that the ballots will be delayed. California is a lower risk state than most because in our case, we're a state where it just needs to be postmarked on election day. So a number of states, the ballot has to be received by election day to count. In California, it just needs to be postmarked by election day. It can be received, I think it's up to 17 days after election day. Either it has to be received in 17 days or received by November 17th. I don't remember which 17 it is, but we have quite a bit more time. So
17 days.
Thank you. Thanks, Brianna.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions? I know I have one, but I don't want to cut off anyone who might have one. I heard a rumor on social media, the most trustworthy thing ever, that if you put a stamp on your mail-in voting ballot, that it ensures that it gets processed quicker because the state didn't have to pay for the stamp, basically. Is there any truth to that? Like, do you want to put the extra, 54 cents on your ballot now? Will that help ensure that it gets counted? Or is that fake news?
I'm pretty sure that's fake news. I mean, election mail is first class, period. Now, Now, I mean, if you want to send it overnight mail, I mean, it'll be processed as overnight mail with the tracking number and all that. But, you know, what I would tell everyone would be election mail is first class mail. If you want the security, I think you'd be better off going and signing up for ballot tracks and have the peace of mind of essentially tracking your ballot that way. And through that, you will know that your ballot was received and counted, and then send it in early, because most folks should be able, I mean, there's no reason folks can't go and send their ballot in now, or, you know, this week, and know weeks in advance that it was received. And if for whatever reason it wasn't or isn't, have plenty of time before election day to go and figure out what went wrong.
Perfect. Are there any additional questions? Again, to unmute yourself, you just hit the mute, unmute portion on the left-hand bottom of your screen at the homepage, or you can put it in the chat box privately to me if you want me to ask your question. I don't mind embarrassing myself, so send it on over.
Jessica, have you all had a chance to talk about the TSU Vote Center at all?
I talked a little bit about it, but by all means, if you want to bring some more out, I would love to showcase it some more.
Sure. So shameless plug here, not really a question. But our campus will be having a vote center on the main campus, which is located at the TSU. It's open for early voting beginning on October 30th through Election Day, which is November 3rd. We will also be having a drive-through ballot drop-off. So for those who just want to go in and drop off their mail-in ballot, instead of mailing it, you can just drive through Law R, which is right outside of the TSU, and basically deliver your ballot to an elections official who will receive it for you. And then also for those of you who perhaps are closer to Irvine, we have a vote center location at our Irvine Center as well.
Thank you so much. We also have a few more voting education series coming up on October 13th. We'll be going over all of the propositions that will be on the California ballot. That will be at 6:30 p.m. And then on October 23rd, we're going to be talking about civility and how we can all get along no matter what the election outcomes are, and how to respect each other and just be one big happy Titan family. So we have those coming up, as well as some great Instagram live sessions. So I'm really excited about that. We have one coming up on October 12th, going over the ballot propositions as well, kind of answering questions. And then on the 23rd, again, prepping for finding some common ground and just, again, wanting to be one happy family. Not to repeat that, but I like it. Is there any other questions for James at all?
Dan.
Yes, hi, this is Dan. You mind
Mr. Dan, thank you. Please.
How are you? Hey, James, thanks a lot for the presentation. The one thing I didn't hear you discuss was the part of the security having to do with the validity of citizenship and the right to vote against the records, accuracy, dead people, all those kind of things that you hear about. Has there been any work to figure out how do you scrub the registrars, make sure that they're valid, they're citizens, they're not ex-cons, or that don't have the right, those kind of things?
Yeah. Yes, I mean that's the, maintaining an accurate voter list on the front end is an area that I think a lot of jurisdictions struggle with. I think California is better than a lot. I won't. There you go. You can see what the dirt in the room looks like here. It's actually not as bad as I thought. Anyways, so there is a challenge in maintaining voter records on the front end. Where that typically gets addressed, if there's any discrepancies or issues, is when you go every year or every election cycle to update the voter registration record. So getting on the list, most jurisdictions have a prove that you're eligible to vote. And that is there is some proof of citizenship required to get on the voter list to begin with. So that piece is pretty straightforward in terms of how did you get on the voter list to begin with. Where it gets more complex is maintaining that list and keeping it up to date. So deaths, loss of eligibility and all that. There's for voter registration systems, a lot of that has become automated in the last several years. So most states now have pretty good systems that connect the voter registration system with the DMV, with the Department of Corrections, with, I don't remember the department that handles, deaths and births and medical records, but those systems have become pretty interchanged now, pretty interconnected now, to where, when someone dies, the voter registration department actually gets birth and death records. They get updates from Department of Corrections when someone has both had their voter eligibility removed and reinstated. But every state has differing rules, and some of them are better and worse than others.
Thank you. Any other questions right now, or did that answer everyone's questions? Perfect. As you know, we have recorded this session. We'll go ahead and be posting this on our California State University alumni YouTube channel. It's a mouthful, but there's great things on there, so please check it out. And for all of our upcoming events, if you go to CSUF alumni and click on the events tab, it will list everything there for you for more voter education and series that we have coming up, links to great resources and sites. If you should think of a question a little bit later today, feel free to email me. I will go ahead and reach out to James to see if we can get answers later on. But thank you so much for joining us on behalf of the Alumni Association. We're so happy to have you and taking this time to educate yourself more on voting. Please don't forget to vote by November 3rd. And please enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Have a great weekend coming up. And thank you so much again, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thank you again, James.
All right. Take care.
Bye.